go ahead and get started, and thanks for joining. I know we cut the break short today. I'm Jamie Thomas, and I am pleased to be with you to talk to you about open source security and the evolution as we go into the AI era. I have a keen interest in this topic. One of my jobs at IBM is I run the CISO office for IBM, so cyber operations and product security for software, hardware, and services offerings. And I'm also very pleased to be a member of the OpenSSF since day one as a governing board member. I was really interested in this forum because I spent a lot of time in IBM on the early days of Linux, as well as the creation of the Eclipse Foundation for Java. So I think that open source is really, really important. Of course, IBM is the steward of Red Hat now, so we have a little bit of a vested interest in this topic. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about who the OpenSSF is. So the Open Source Security Foundation was founded about 2020, and it was really based on an interest from a number of the governing board constituents, and you can see the governing board here across a number of the technology companies, as well as the foundation, the financial sector, to understand how we place a fine point on open source security. And realize at the time that we formed this in 2020, we really did not know what was coming, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we thought, yeah, this is a good idea, but it was the advent of the SolarWinds attack. I would say that this is the governing board, but we also have 117 members. So this gives you a full perspective of our scope. And the interest that we have is not just being a governing board committee, of course, but a resource for organizations that join us around education, tooling, and policy development across the geopolitical spectrum. The individuals here have an opportunity to also participate in work groups and our Technology Advisory Council, which is really, really important for the evolution of the security landscape with open source. I don't think I need to belabor the value of open source too much because the speakers this morning did an excellent job. Open source is really powering the economy, not just from an enterprise perspective, of course, but from a consumer perspective. It has allowed us to be very productive in the IT spectrum as well as in industry, and it has provided an economic advantage, which I think even the last speaker at the keynote today really expressed. But it also means we have responsibility. We're consuming this resource, so it is important for us as enterprise organizations to think about how we contribute back with our skills, our point of view, to make sure that open source remains a viable resource for the future. And that's one of the focus areas of the OpenSSF. I wanted to put a fine point on this by scaring you perhaps with some of the software supply chain attacks that have occurred in the last few years. And many of you maybe lived through these, but I think these in particular fundamentally have shaped our view of security in not only IBM, but in the context of the OpenSSF. So SolarWinds was probably the first big sophisticated software supply chain attack. It was a nation-state attack on the software distribution mechanism of SolarWinds. So then the malware was distributed throughout the customer base and into their networks. It was very complicated to find. It was discovered by FireEye because they were vigilant about an investigation. Once they announced that they had found it, it then unleashed its furor on everybody that had consumed it. What it really proved to us is the importance of a zero trust security architecture. What we found in IBM is that if you had CrowdStrike on your endpoint, as an example, it did not go anywhere. It was the equivalent of being exposed to COVID-19, but you did not catch COVID-19. It also put a fine point on inventory management. Do you know where this thing is? In IBM, we're a pretty large organization. At that time, we still had our outsourced organization, which was even bigger. That's now in a company called Kyndryl. So we needed to know where these were, and also it put a fine point on third-party risk management. Do you understand who is developing your code, who's responsible, what country of origin do they reside in? Third-party risk management continues to be a very top-of-mind topic. We saw the open letter from JP Morgan Chase today on that particular vector. We thought we were doing okay until Log4Shell happened in the next year. Log4j actually was much more invasive, even though it was a pre-announced vulnerability in this Java piece of code. But the remediation for it cost billions of dollars. It also put another fine point of, are you scanning your code continuously to understand where software artifacts are? Do you have a software bill of materials? Do you understand how you would mitigate something like this by understanding where it is? I can tell you today in IBM, if something like this occurs, we know where all the artifacts are in 5 minutes. Because you need to, because I'll talk about one of the others here. Move It. Move It was not open source, neither was SolarWinds, of course, but Move It is a file transfer software. Once again, a nation-state attack that was dormant until they decided to unleash the attack, I think on a US holiday. And 93 million personal records were consumed and made open through this attack. Once again, third-party risk management, understanding best practices, very, very important. And the last one was very unique. It's called XZ, but it was where the project was infiltrated by a committer who had bad intentions. So how do we as an open source community protect ourselves with the right kind of scorecard information to understand the project health and mitigate this kind of thing? Luckily, the community did catch this one, and it was never propagated upstream. Testimony to the value of the community. So this is why open source security is important, and this is why we have a foundation around these topics. Now you look at this against the backplane of AI. So while we're all taking advantage of AI from a productivity perspective in our organizations, so are the bad guys. They're using AI to perpetrate deep fakes. I had someone in London tell me a few weeks ago that they accidentally hired an AI bot. It is easy to hire, apparently, in the United States, North Koreans. You know what I mean? You have to think about, it really is a serious issue. Where are the personnel? Do you know who they are? What are their intentions should they get access to your network? Many of these attacks now are based on credential attacks, and so it puts a fine point on your authentication policies and how you manage credentials. Things like passkeys and biometrics are more important. And of course, they're all very sophisticated. In the world of AI, it puts a different backplane on this, which is we have to worry about data penetration, poison data, about the governance of the models, as we talked about in the earlier session. How do we know that we can trust these models, that they have the right provenance? It also puts a really strong emphasis, I believe, on what we've been calling the SDLC, but now the AI DLC, the software delivery chain for AI, which becomes much more active in agentic AI. How do you allow it to be the productivity tool that you desire while also making sure that you have a human oversight of this software delivery chain? It's going to put new expectations on us that are delivering AI to our organizations. My team, I also have another role in IBM, which is client support worldwide. And we're heavy users of AI, but once again, it requires the human oversight to make sure that we're giving a bank, as an example, the right answer instead of the wrong answer, because we don't have an option of giving them the wrong answer. So what does this mean for OpenSSF? OpenSSF has been on this journey for about 5 years. Once again, very focused on education, focused on delivering tools and delivering perspective from a policy agenda. Some of the tools, I would say, have been really, really instrumental in the last few years. We implemented SigStore a few years ago, which provides secure software signing for the open source community, and it was a collaboration across many players in the community, including, I know Red Hat was very involved in that. We also have a vulnerability database that is very, very useful, supporting a number of repositories, and we're looking to how we can strengthen our play in this particular area. The scorecard is really useful. What's the health of the open source projects that you're consuming? We actually use the scorecard in IBM every day. The scorecard has become a feature, particularly given some of those exploits that I mentioned on the other page. You really want to consume open source projects that are healthy. And frankly, as organizations consuming this and getting an advantage from it, we also need to think about contributors to these open source projects. CTI and securing repos has been another big agenda of the OpenSSF, and we've made a lot of progress in this domain. But I wanted to highlight some of the assets that we've done recently for AI. These are really, really good assets. One is we've extended the signing capability now through a number of mechanisms, including SigStore, to the models themselves. We have a great MLSecOps white paper. So how do you evolve what you know today is the ADLC to the the machine learning and AI lifecycle, if you will, which requires some different twists and turns. And also understanding how to secure the lifecycle, which was also discussed in that last keynote. Very, very important. How do we manage the lifecycle of AI? One of the things that I've learned through this journey is it's very simple, but getting a data strategy in place and understanding how you will manage the data and the governance of the model is really, really important. The team has also written a white paper on how to use AI for coding and what are the security concerns around AI for coding. So AI for coding is very popular, very productive. There's a number of considerations that you can do and put in place up front. I think for all of us who are stewards of AI expansion in our organization, if we just help the teams create a center of competence and also automate a lot of this, it'll be really good for the organization. And then policy. This has been a policy-rich area, if you will. When Log4j happened, many of us at the OpenSSF had a lot of chances and opportunities to speak to the White House, to CISA, to NIST, to express our point of view around what needed to be done to prevent this from happening or, protect ourselves. It is in the interest of organizations, IT organizations and commercial organizations to have a point of view, to make sure we're protecting ourselves while not over-regulating ourselves. This brings me to the next point where we're very involved in the EU Cyber Resiliency Act. For any of you that are international companies, this will be very, very important. And the EU does have a tendency to enjoy regulation. So we're trying to lend our point of view, and I know Steve Fernandez, who's here as a GM of OpenSSF, is on his way to Europe soon to be a part of those discussions. And this continues across the globe. We want to make sure that we're representing a community of stakeholders. Think about it, before we convene this community of very senior members of this governing board, we actually didn't have a set of people that work together like this across IBM, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, all of these companies to really collectively form this point of view, and I think that's why this is particularly important. That was the highlights of some of the things we've done. Actually, at the working level, we have many projects that the team has focused on, and in some cases we've made progress. We retire the project, we move on to the next project. But this is the traditional software development lifecycle, and you can see all the projects that we've done at each level of this spectrum to enable security. Once again, we're doing that with the MLSecOps lifecycle as well. So there's a lot of opportunity to participate and be a stakeholder in this important journey. We're not just working within this OpenSSF community. It's really important, given the AI landscape, that we continue the journey thinking about the expansion that's occurring across many other organizations. So standards and frameworks is very important. Working with CISA as it evolves, because it's very much evolving right now. The EU organizations to ensure we have adoptable frameworks that can really work for our business. Making sure that we have trust and security in AI. So the Coalition for Secure AI and the Cloud Security Alliance are particular stakeholders that we're working with in that vein. And then extending our reach around governmental and policy across many organizations and parts of the globe with AI Alliance and OWASP. So we've always found that in this in the OpenSSF, we have to collaborate and help the other open source organizations outside of the Linux Foundation. If we remember, Log4j is not in the Linux Foundation. So we didn't just ignore that, we embraced it and helped them. We've worked with the Eclipse Foundation as an example over this period of time as well to help them with security, and many others. So we'll talk more about engagement from the financial sector. I'm not asking for money, by the way, like the last speaker did. Steve is asking for the money. You know, at IBM, I think the money is worth it you know, I told Steve, because this is such a top-of-mind topic. I get to go to the IBM board a lot, and many people in IBM never see the IBM board. I think I've been to the board 12 times at least. And it means that this is very important to corporate boards. And one of the things we always say to them is we're very involved in the community of open source security because we own Red Hat. We're responsible for Red Hat, but we're also responsible for a lot of other artifacts because we're consuming open source. And it's really important to be able to say you have a front row seat in terms of what happens. IBM, though, just advertising, we did get ISO certified just recently, this past week, and we believe we're one of the first large, if not the first large AI vendor to get this certification from ISO, so we wanted to just point that out. We're really a proponent of open source AI and having security and trust as we evolve the agenda here. And how can you participate? So become a member at different levels. That one page I showed the tiering. There's different levels of becoming a member of OpenSSF. The working projects have a lot of really smart people in them. I personally have read a lot of the white papers that we produced, and you've got the best of the best, you know, working on these white papers. Experts at Intel and Dell and Microsoft and Google and many others, right, sharing their point of view. There's many meetings. The team meets around the globe and has meetups. There's going to be a meeting in Brussels, right, next week as part of the EU work that the team is doing. Lots of ways to collaborate through the technology that we use, Slack and GitHub, but also just get on the mailing list. This is really, I think, an important endeavor. It's what I found in my course of work. It's sometimes hard to get people engaged in security until something happens to them. And I always say the mop-up on aisle 5 is a little bit more challenging than being proactive. So what I would say is think about how this applies to your organization. Think about how you're using AI in the future, because there's a lot of good resources we're developing for AI. And we'd love to collaborate with you at OpenSSF as we go forward. You know, I've run through these slides pretty quick because I didn't want to drown you through PowerPoint. But if I think we got time for a few questions if anyone has a question. And if it's really difficult, I'll let this expert here answer them because he's written a lot of the white papers. Does it make sense? Everybody's excited about security after this? Maybe, maybe. Some of us are. Now, an opportunity to think about the supply chain attacks. That page I had with just 4 on there, there's a much bigger page. It's a much bigger page, and those 4 are probably the most seminal in terms of really changing the game and what we do. Yes?
How do you convince non-tech people to care about that?
Yeah, the question is, how do you convince non-tech people to care about this? Well, I think that in some ways, the non-tech people, depending on the organization, may care more, because like just today, I looked at the Jaguar Land Rover situation. So one of the things I didn't mention is the most attacked industry right now is manufacturing, because they decided financial sector was a little bit harder to attack, right? Manufacturing's easy. The Jaguar attack on the manufacturing operations, the UK has lost now $2 billion. The UK has lost that, right? So the monetary loss is huge in some of these cases. The United Healthcare Group Change software attack cost them over $3 billion and also almost shut down the entire medical system, Medicaid, Medicare system for the United States. Huh? Yes, yeah, yeah. And that's what they're saying in this supply chain thing for the UK is the smaller businesses are going out of business, right? They can't sustain the fact that, you're shut down for 5 weeks, and so your social obligation lingers a lot longer. And that's what I think we can share. What I find is you got to share that with a lot of the stakeholders, though, because not everybody sits and reads the press on security like somebody like me, right? I'm getting alert every day. I'm getting alert in my mailbox every day as to how much did Jaguar lose, how much did Marks and Spencer's lose. I went to the UK when Marks and Spencer's was shut down. And that was a big deal because they controlled a lot of online grocery shopping, right? So, just think about your online grocery has gone out of business, right? Materiality to the companies. There's a lot of obligation to board stakeholders. There's many examples out there. I would tell you my impression is that the United States is the riskiest country in the world. We take risks that no other country will take. Europe is not as risky, and when you get to Asia, forget it. They don't want any risk. I just came out of Japan last week, and it's all about zero risk. So we in the United States, we tend to have a high risk appetite, but then how much is it worth, right? You saved, people will save, I saved 100 million. Is 100 million worth 3.5 billion? Or 2 billion here and there, right? So I think that's the perspective that we've got to have a conversation around. And there's ways to do, I think, this very intelligently so that you're not spending hundreds of millions of dollars to achieve security, but you have to use AI in security. The IBM infrastructure that we have today, we're consuming 100 billion events. We take in 100 billion events a day, 25 petabytes of data a day. And the only way we can do that is through, extreme automation. There's not humans sitting there looking at all that, right? So it's just got to be highly automated. You've got to be using the kind of resources that we're talking about here to make sure your developers are automated. The whole process is automated. And open source is a really, really important part of it. And we're all stewards and stakeholders. Yes?
I have a question about the scorecard.
Yes.
The open source project health. What are some of the attributes that you would look at to say if an open source project is healthy or it's not?
Well, one of the things is we look at the contribution ratio. I mean, how many contributors are there? Are they following the best practices that we're recommending? So we have a number of best practices now, baseline kind of recommendations. But the contribution thing became a concern when we looked at some of these earlier projects like Log4j. Log4j didn't have many contributors left, although it was so highly consumed. And then the XZ one is just another bad example of that, So the contribution ratio is really important. And one of the things we did in IBM actually is we did go back and look at contribution to some of these projects ourselves after we saw some of this, right? And then because of Red Hat, we have the opportunity to influence contribution quite a bit.
And do you think that can be extended to open source AI systems?
Oh, yes. Yeah, the scorecard. Yeah, absolutely. That would be the intent. The fundamentals that we built here, which, by the way, we're quite a squawky governing board. I mean, can you imagine, IBM and Google and Microsoft and AWS, we get together, and Intel and Dell, and we just immediately agree on things, right? So we always have this big discussion around priorities. What should we be investing in? Because it does take some technical power behind the scenes to make this happen. And, I think this kind of evolution of SIG Store as well as evolution of scorecard is just a natural fit.